new classmates, where we would be for the next 9 months. So it really was a new year and a new beginning. The start of the new year was exciting and a little scary at the same time. It's been a long time since I've had a first day of school, and it's probably been a while for many, but not all of us. Once you graduated from high school or college, you probably thought that that was the end of studying and learning. We tend to think of school as one phase of our life, and once that's finished, we move on to the next stages: adulthood, career, marriage, family, and so on. We also have a certain image in our minds of what studying looks like. We think it only happens in a classroom with a pile of textbooks in front of us, like this. I'd like us to go beyond this narrow definition of studying as something we do only when we're young before we move on to our real life. As Shin Buddhists, we should be perpetual students. We should always be studying and seeking, because the Buddhist path is one of lifelong learning. I'm not talking about academic learning, something you study to pass a test or get a diploma. I'm talking about real life, and the subject that you are studying is yourself. What are the ways in which we learn and study as Shin Buddhists? I'd like to talk about 3 of them. The first kind of study is listening. When asked how we practice Buddhism in Jodo Shinshu, the traditional answer is listening. The Japanese term for that is monpo. Monpo literally means listen to the Dharma, listening to the teachings. Listening seems simple because it's something that we do all the time, right? But monpo means more than just hearing in the sense of taking in sounds. It means deeply listening to the Dharma, the Buddhist teachings. Think about what happens when you do something deeply. Oops, sorry. Deep dive. If you take a deep dive, for example, you don't stay on the surface. You go far below it. It takes more effort to go deep than to skim the surface. It's more difficult. You aren't just lazily floating on top of the water. You're going into unknown territory. You don't know exactly what it will be like down below. So you have to concentrate and pay attention. When we practice monpo, we are deeply and actively listening to the Dharma. We are listening with attention and intention. We're bringing our full awareness to the task. We're also setting aside our preconceived ideas, our judgments, and our personal agendas. With monpo, you are listening with total receptivity. I'm not hearing with one ear while sitting on the edge of my seat just waiting for my chance to talk. The French philosopher Simone Weil said, "Absolutely unmixed attention is prayer." We don't pray in Buddhism, or at least not in this tradition, but her words touch on how profound, powerful, and even sacred listening can be. And where do we do our listening to the Dharma? It can be when we're at the temple attending a service, like this morning. We can listen when we take a class on Buddhism, or when we chant a Buddhist sutra like we did just now, or when we read a book about Buddhism, because teachings can be conveyed in ways other than sound, and our listening isn't limited to things that we perceive with our ears. And where do those teachings that we listen to come from? We would have nothing to listen to without teachers. The Dharma, which is limitless reality or truth, is calling to us, but we need the voice of human teachers in order to hear it. The Buddhist teachings that we follow here at Vista originated with the historical Buddha, Shakyamuni. They were transmitted from India, China, and Japan through the 7 Pure Land masters to Shinran Shonin, the founder of our tradition, and then through the many teachers who followed him until it finally reached us here today. I would not have encountered the Buddha Dharma if I had not met with Reverend Marvin Harada and the Orange County Buddhist Church. I would not have learned more about Buddhism without the many teachers that I've been privileged to hear and learn from. Guest ministers at my temple, speakers at seminars and classes that I've taken, both in person and online, the authors of books I've read. I've learned from all of them. A second and very important kind of study that we do in Buddhism is studying ourselves, self-examination. To study myself means to look closely and honestly at myself and then reflect on what I see. This kind of self-reflection is at the very heart of Buddhism. As one of our teachers, Dr. Nobuo Haneda, often says, Buddhism is nothing but self-examination, by which he means self-examination is everything. Why is it important to look at yourself? Self-examination begins with observing and thinking about our own behavior. If we look at ourselves honestly, we can't help but see our faults, our ego, our selfishness, our self-delusion. Through self-reflection, we recognize that we are foolish beings filled with greed, anger, and stupidity. I want to share a story with you, being very honest here. I recently made a big mistake when I missed an assignment. I was supposed to lead a Wednesday night meditation service at Orange County Buddhist Church. It was on the minister's Google Calendar, but somehow I failed to make note of it. At 7 p.m., when the service was supposed to start, there was nobody there to lead it. There was a last-minute scramble, and Reverend Harada was called out of a committee meeting to cover the service for me without any warning or any time to prepare. I found out about it several hours later when I checked my email and saw a message from one of the other ministers informing me about what had happened. Well, of course, I was mortified and embarrassed, but what was the first thing I said? I emailed back, I don't remember seeing that assignment on the calendar. There must have been a change. The second thing I said was, Jim, my husband, who's known to be a very reliable and conscientious guy, Jim didn't notice it on the calendar either. It wasn't until the next day that I looked back on what I did and what I said and realized how badly I'd behaved. I'd made a mistake, which was one thing. We can all make mistakes. But my reaction was worse than my mistake. My first impulse was to defend myself. Basically, I said, hey, it wasn't my fault. I tried to shift the responsibility and point the finger of blame at anyone and anywhere but myself. It wasn't my finest moment. Seeing myself act like that was unpleasant, but looking honestly at my behavior and reflecting on it taught me so much. I could see how big my ego was, that I wasn't able to admit that I made a mistake, and that I had to defend this image of myself as a responsible and reliable person, and that I was deserving of wearing this robe. Seeing all of that in myself was very humbling. To lead an awakened life, a life of Shinjin, means to constantly look at ourselves and to reflect on ourselves. Sometimes we see a monkey. It is a process that never ends, but it's the only way that we can see our failures and our shortcomings, and through that realize that we are incapable of achieving enlightenment through our own efforts alone. It's only when we reach that realization that we can give up our reliance on self-power. A third way in which we study Buddhism is by doing, that is, simply through the process of living our lives every day. Sometime after I first started going to temple, I heard the phrase, my life is my practice. That's what our practice is here at Orange County Buddhist Church. That really resonated with me when I heard that. I think because I was looking for a spiritual path that was relevant to my everyday life. Listening to the Dharma and self-examination don't work in isolation. We need other people to bring us face to face with our true selves. It is through our ordinary daily interactions with our family, our coworkers, our friends, our fellow temple members that we truly see ourselves. It's easy to think about your ego self in the abstract, but when you are dealing with your friends, your enemies, your loved ones, it becomes very real. Sometimes it's through dealing with the most difficult people in our lives that we learn the most about ourselves. or those opportunities give us the chance to practice compassion or generosity, or to not practice them. Every day, we have countless opportunities to take the Buddhist teachings and apply them to our lives. Buddhism is not about theory, it's about practice. Buddhism is something that we do. As Reverend Moskodani of the Sensei Buddhist temple said, Buddhism is a religion of experience, not faith. We also learn from watching others, so that's a part of that doing. Other people can be our best examples and role models. This is mochitsuki, or the mochi making at our temple in December, and I know you do that here at Vista as well. When you are making mochitsuki, I learn a lot from the other people who are working alongside me, learning about working as a team, watching people who've been doing it for decades and learning from them exactly how they do it, seeing people who pay attention to every detail, they're careful about everything, and that reminds me to slow down and to be just as careful as they are. Learning to do things correctly and carefully, it's something that I learned from watching ladies like these. Last night I happened to be talking to a minister who was saying that before he ever became a minister, he learned by watching and hearing Reverend Harada that those were his first lessons on how to become a minister, watching the way that he taught, watching the way that he behaved, watching the way that he treated people. He said those were his earliest and best lessons on how he should be when he became a minister. You need all three of these kinds of study. Studying lays the foundation for Shinjin, or spiritual awakening. Spiritual awakening is something that we receive, not something that we attain solely through our own efforts. But in order to receive it, we have to create the right conditions for our spiritual aspiration to take root and grow. When we deeply listen to the Dharma, engage in self-reflection, and use our daily lives as the classroom for our self-examination, we're creating the favorable conditions for receiving enlightenment. A key thing about these three kinds of study is that they're not about reaching some level of attainment or accomplishment, like getting an A in class, or graduating with honors, or getting a black belt in judo. In fact, one of the major reasons that we study is not to see how accomplished and how smart we are, but to see how foolish we are and how little we know. Sometimes the more we study, the less we know. Becoming aware of that humbles us. It shows us that we have to set aside our arrogant confidence that we don't have anything to learn. Without being humble, we cannot learn to give up our conviction that enlightenment is something that we can attain through our own self-power. And it's how we understand that Shinjin is something that we receive through a power beyond ourselves. We need to cultivate in ourselves what Dr. Haneda calls the spirit of perpetual studentship. To have that spirit means to always have the beginner's mind, an attitude that is eager to learn, that's open to new ideas, that sets aside preconceived notions. We should constantly look for opportunities to listen and learn, not because we want to master something or become an expert or attain some credential. It is about always being a student and never thinking of yourself as a master, as a teacher. Shinran Shonin, the founder of our tradition, never saw himself as a founder or an expert. He said, "For myself, I do not have even a single disciple. For if I brought people to say the Nembutsu through my own efforts, then they might be my disciples. But it is indeed preposterous to call people my disciples when they say the Nembutsu having received the working of Amida." He knew that it was not solely through his efforts that people followed the Nembutsu path, that it was something that people received from the other power of Amida. He saw himself as a seeker, a student, not a teacher. Here are two people who inspired me greatly on my Buddhist path. These two ladies are dear friends of ours, members of Orange County Buddhist Church. I think that maybe the first time Jim and I ever walked into the temple to take a class, Sachi, the lady on the right, was there greeting us and welcoming us. She knew immediately that we were newcomers. She said welcome, and she ushered us into the class, and that was the start of our Buddhist learning. Even into their mid-90s, these ladies continued to study and to learn with diligence and enthusiasm. They have that spirit of perpetual studentship that Dr. Haneda describes. I aspire to be like them, and I hope that we all do, that we want to be like them, lifelong learners. Namo Amida. Namo Amida. Namo Amida.